Hi there, how's it going? Let's see, we'll just tweak that slightly and make sure this is set up. So we just wait for everyone to arrive. Rupachita, hi. I saw some of your sketches, Rupachita, from Constable on Facebook. They were excellent. Yeah, really like those. And Teresa, Phil, Ellie, nice to see you. Okay. So, almost there. Let's just give it another minute or so. So we went for a long walk yesterday. Not too well. It was quite long. We walked round to the River Orwell and round that way. I took my camera with the idea I was going to take lots of compositional shots, but as one of the things I mentioned is we were out walking about midday. So it's not really the best time of day to be taking photographs, just because everything goes a bit flat. So in a way, I wish I'd been down there a bit more, like sort of 7, 8 o'clock in the evening. I'm sure I would have got some good snaps. But and of course, the other thing is, I thought we were going to be getting away from it all, but as it turned out, there seemed to be half of Ipswich were down there, down at Nacton Shoals. So it was a bit busy, busier than I would have liked. Okay, so let's just we'll make a start and see how we go. So what I'm going to do this morning is we'll talk a little bit about the principles of composition. And then I can talk about the armatures, because if you understand the principles, then you can make more sense of how the armatures work. And you could theoretically come up with some yourself, or it gives you more sort of freedom to experiment. Okay, so as long as you get what you're trying to achieve with composition, that will help. Right, this keeps moving back, so just bear with me 1 second. Okay, so composition, this is specifically one of the things that I wasn't taught a great deal when I was at college. Like I said, lots of other things, but composition in particular. So once you've got the hang of painting objects, things, really this is your big skill. This is the big area to develop, which is how to arrange objects or pick good views. Yeah, it often that's where strong paintings come from, which is good composition and design. Often you can paint a picture or do a drawing, and for some reason there's a feeling of it not quite working. And of course it may be the drawing, but more often than not it's the composition, and that can lead to a feeling of things being a bit imbalanced. Okay, so let's have a look. So the first thing we're going to go for is composition. So composition is about how the parts of your painting relate to the whole. Okay, so it's really about this idea of it's almost like a left brain, right brain idea. So we could imagine this is left brain, parts and things, and this is right brain, which is how everything works together. So often when we start painting or drawing, we tend to become so focused on separate things or objects, portrait or faces, or like a tree, or we don't see how that one particular thing relates to our shape of our canvas and our painting as a whole. So good composition is about this. It's the big picture, and it's seeing how all the objects interact on your picture plane. And objects can include anything from the sort of shapes, the colours, the tonal values, all those elements. They need to sort of integrate and all be working together, and that's really what good composition is about. So The next idea, which is good to be aware of, is the idea of focal points. And that is really the principle that within a composition, you have some part of it which is your focus. So it is really what the painting, the subject is. Focal points, though, can be abstractly, they can be things like areas with high contrast. Okay, or they could be bright color. And of course, they could also be objects that are significant. Okay, so you can see here, if I do a little thumbnail sketch here. So here's a very simplified landscape, okay? And obviously you can see there's nothing there which is going to pull the eye. So as soon as we introduce something, let's put something here, okay, we have created a focal point. And so that's really, that becomes basically the subject of our painting, okay. Now, focal points then tie up to another idea, which is, in one of the books I read on composition, there was an idea called Principality. And that was the idea of you have, let's say, the king. Okay. And then you have also like courtiers, which are objects of less importance. So how this relates to our painting is we have one thing which is really important, okay? And then we have other things which our eye can go and look at afterwards. So for example, an interesting cloud formation, okay? A bird, a tree, okay? Maybe a person, maybe a stone and some sticks or something. Okay, so all these give you secondary interest, areas like the courtiers. And so first of all, we go in and we have a look at our main focal point, which I say could even just be some light or something that grabs the eye initially. And then we go around and we have a look at these other points of interest and then come back, okay? The church, yes, no. That's our little church. It could be, I think, say if we went to Bob Ross, it would be a little hut, okay? That's Alaska. They have lots of little huts, so maybe I'll adapt my church. So that's Principality, and then that brings up this other point, which is eye movement, okay? Or you could also think of this as eye paths. And this is based on the principle that they did lots of analysis of the way people read a painting. And although you might assume that you simply look at it and take it all in one go, what actually happens is your eye takes in one area at a time. And so it is like reading. There's a sequence. So if you understand that principle, then you can be more aware of there's something where our eye, let's see where if you can see, so if I draw one over here, okay, so if I do another one, and this time we'll put a hut, don't want to repeat myself, okay, maybe a house. So that's our focal point. So as a rule of thumb, our eye tends to enter the picture in this corner, okay? So we tend to go from left to right. So this is a sort of conditioned response as how we read. So we sort of scan from left to right. And I don't know why, but we tend to start at the lower and come in and up. That tends to be the way our eye moves, okay? So with that in mind, if we create a path, if that path comes like this, our eye will naturally move along that line, okay? Our eye likes to sort of travel along that line. So if we make that path windy, then we actually encourage our eye to almost take a journey to that house. And there's something that the eye finds, I think, we find that more pleasing than just a straight line going straight to the house. It's a bit too quick. So, and so we can know that basically our eye is going to come in and up and reach that house. And then what's it going to do? Well, at the moment, it's just going to, it'll look around this sky and there's nothing to see. If I put something here, let's say we put a bird flying in the sky, or that could have been a sun, then once we've reached our focal point, we know that our eye is going to be going towards that bird, okay? And then theoretically, you could assist that maybe by having a cloud formation, and then that cloud line basically takes you up in the direction, okay? So once you're aware that your eye likes to travel along these paths, this is why I was saying to Stuart the idea that you don't put barriers in the way, okay? There's something that's not very nice about that. If we put a fence post, even if it's really nicely drawn and painted, it can obstruct our way in. And that's also like a bit of a problem with lots of horizontals. So normally you want to break it and allow your eye to sort of pass through. Okay, so eye movement and paths, that's something we need to be aware of. Okay, so those are some principles that we need to be aware of. Let's have a look here. So this is still composition principles. Okay, so the other one we need to be aware of is the tension between variety and similarity. So again, this is a principle, and this is borne out by some of the armatures and designs that come later on. So basically, if we have too much variety, you end up with something that's a bit chaotic. Too much similarity and you have a boring composition. Okay, so Margaret's here. Hi Margaret, nice to see you. Hope you're doing well. Let's have a look. So here's our composition. So let's say, for example, we do this where we've got a landscape and it's half and half. So you can see straight away that that's got the problem of too much similarity, okay, too equal. And so we can introduce variety. Let's say, how would we do this? So if I introduce another one, let's say we've got a cloud line here or something like that. So now that's better because we've got one shape here and then this shape and this shape. So that already creates more variety, okay? And then I'm just thinking abstractly here. So if I was to break this one up, say, say like that. Okay, then also we have variety. But if I then introduce, let's say, this is all again abstract, a vertical, okay, and a diagonal, and perhaps another vertical, and a circle, and the more I add, the more I start to go into chaos, and it just becomes a little bit jumbled, okay? So those are the things you're looking for. So another good example of this is portrait design. So if you put your portrait in the middle, okay, this can be a bit boring because that's the same as that, and then that's the same as that, and then, well, that I've naturally moved the head a bit up, but people will often place their object of interest slap bang up. Val's here. Hi, Val. Excellent. Hope you're in okay now. So again, this creates, yeah, a lot of similarity. Now, often portrait artists will break this up, say, by having, let's say, half the face here in shadow. That would be a good way around it. Okay, so there are ways that you can still break it up, but you'll often see, let's say, you might have something like this. You crop the face. So by cropping the face like that, I create a big gap here and a small gap here, okay? And we've got this eye, this sort of line of the, this time the face is moved slightly on the diagonal, which also makes it more interesting, okay? So there's lots of ways that you can see this principle applied. Another good one I have is like, often you'll see this in books on design and stuff. Say you've got 3 apples. Okay, so that's too boring. But then let's say we make one of them red. Okay, and then automatically you've got a little bit more interest. Okay, you've actually even got a focal point. So similarity and variety. One of the examples, I think in that book, The Simple Secret to Better Painting, I think it might be there, but there's reference to the effect of going into a baker's and you see all the different coloured buns, okay? And that variety actually stimulates your interest and makes you look, because you can't sort of work it all out. If it was all just the same donut and loads of them, okay, it's not going to be as visually attractive. So our eye likes variety, okay, and it's what can sort of bring us round, and just something that we need to. I was thinking, this is a good example. Let's say we've got this. Let's say we've got a composition here. So one of the artists I was thinking of doing a master copy from, Peter Wildman, who I think used to be president of the New England Art Club. And a couple of years ago, I got one of his DVDs, and he's a great painter, and it demonstrates, and he talks about brush marks, and brush marks themselves can easily become too similar, repetitive, okay? And what he was saying is that, say you're doing a tree line, well, our eye likes to do this sort of thing. Okay, it likes to do repetition, similarity. And what you need to do is almost train your hand to make variety. Okay, so you have to train away from pattern and repetition and make shapes that are more interesting. So like with a tree, you know, instead of it being too repetitive, you need to introduce as much variety into your shape making. And I say that's almost a skill of the hand. You're sort of training your brain to create variety. Okay. So similarity and variety. Okay, and we've looked at eye movement. So there's some of the principles that sit behind good composition. Okay, and that's really we're primarily talking about composition of line, but you've also got tone. But we'll perhaps talk about a bit more about that in another class. So now let's say a little bit about these armatures. Now, as it happened, this was, let's see if you can see this. So I've got a camera here. This is a, oh, it doesn't say, a Panasonic camera. I can't see which one it is. But I bought it a couple of years ago. There it is on the thing as well. And now I don't know whether you're going to be able to see this. Let's... Okay, no, you won't be able to see it. But what I took it for this walk yesterday, and what interested me is it actually had within it some various compositional armatures that you could actually put on the viewfinder. Okay, so I thought it'd be worth going over a couple of those. And these are if we don't do too many, you can experiment with them during the week. Okay, so the first is the rule of thirds. Okay, and there are different ways to divide it. This is how on the camera, I mean, this is obviously designed by people that know their photography. We would assume, let's see. Okay, so in this rule of thirds, it was a bit like this. Something like that. Now, obviously, you can see that these gaps here are bigger than these gaps. So there's no, I can't see, obviously the camera doesn't tell me why it's opted for that as opposed to just straightforward. But there might be something in it, so you could do a bit of research in yourself. But what it's the principle of the rule of thirds is that when you're looking for your focal point, whether it's could be the eye of someone or a distant church, tree, windmill, something like that, you have this tension. So when we think of our similarity and variety, let's say we're using our rule of thirds and we've got our horizon line up here. Okay. So in a compositional design, if you're choosing where to put your focal point, if you put it bang in the middle, that's regarded as bad composition. And one of the reasons is because all the sort of divisions between it and the side of the canvas become the same. Okay, and it creates two equal division. If I put my focal point up in the corner or at the edge, that's not good either, because it's going to basically Wildman. I think that looks right. Yeah, I think that's him. My mind goes blank. Peter Wildman, I think. Oh, we'll see if you can find him, Rupert Chitter. Otherwise, I will dig out a link for you at some point. So if we put our focal point at the edge, that's not good because it tends to pull our eye out. This is why you don't tend to put interesting things or colours or anything like that in the corners of your composition. So between the centre and the edges and the corners, there has to be almost an optimum point. and this is the sort of thing that you get with either the golden ratio or this principle of thirds, is that these points here where they cross are seen as particularly good points to place your focal point. So in this arrangement, this would put, I could put my focal point here. Let's say we're going to use this one. So let's say here. Now I'm not going to do another church. I'm going to do a lighthouse. Okay. So there I've put my lighthouse there. And that's used my rule of thirds. And you can already see maybe that that's not, that creates quite a pleasing composition. Let's imagine some sort of zigzaggy sort of road, so our eye goes in and back, something like that. So that's a good place to start, the rule of thirds. And you can go for a walk either with your camera or your viewfinder, and particularly focus on this and try and find something in these spots here. So there's two tricks there, which is firstly to use it and then also to identify what your focal point is. So that would be a good exercise, okay? So it uses the rule of thirds on this camera. So that's the first one for you to be aware of. Then what else? What else? So that's rule of thirds. Okay. So the next one, I think I'd like you to look at is like a circle. So this sort of thing. So a circle is a really good compositional device because it's a bit like the idea of creating a frame within a frame. Okay, so you're creating a frame within your picture that frames up some sort of focal point. So with the circle composition, that's not usually your focal point. That's framing up. Let's use our thirds though. That might be framing up something in here. Okay. So what could this circle be? Well, I'm thinking a little bit of Teresa's, those compositions within forests are quite good for this sort of thing. So let's say we've got a path, okay, maybe a light bit in the distance, and you've got some trees and various bits like that. So remember, the idea with these armatures is they are disguised somewhat. But let's say you've got a darkish shape here. So if you've got any woods or anything like that near you, go for a walk around there and you will probably find a good circle-like composition. You might even get it doubled up. There might be a circle within that circle or something like that. It's almost like a tunnel, okay? But other examples of it could be even as subtle as this. Let's put a lowish horizon. Okay, something in the distance, some sort of focal point there. Then remember our eye comes in this way, so perhaps we have something like that, some sort of path, okay. Then here we have, say, a tree. That pulls our eye around. Then we might have at the top here just some clouds. And then that line is bringing us down, and then maybe another tree or something like that. So that's what I'm trying to show you there, is the way it becomes disguised. It could even be, let's say we have this. Oh, don't worry about that. Let's say we have that, and we have that. And then you see this in photography is, let's say you've got basically just dark at the corners, okay, dark at the corners. So can you see that? And that itself creates something like a circle. And it frames up our centre of interest, okay? So that's the rule of thirds and circles. So we'll just, let's put that. And I'll do one more because I think if you have 3 to be working on, I think that'll be quite circles, and we'll also look at L shapes. Okay, so let me just so this is one of the books that I've been dipping into, and I often use in my classes, Mastering Composition by Ian Roberts. Really good book, and not only has it got good stuff on composition, but it's also got some good painting in here, and let's see, you see that? And he does a combination of still life and landscapes. Yeah, and so some of the information in here is really good. So here he's got, in fact, here you can't see it particularly well, but he's got examples of using the circle within a compositional device. And the other thing is, when you often read these books on composition, you'll notice that they have like they'll have a shape drawn on top, and it probably won't even particularly tie up. And sometimes it doesn't really, it just looks like it's been stuck on the top anyhow. But that the idea there is it's being disguised, okay? So I'm just going to draw on one of his for this L shape, okay? So he has this composition, which is a metal drum. Oh, and there's a plank of wood, okay? And then that meets a horizon like that, okay? So you basically then have, let's say that's shaded in there. Okay, and then that's a darker mass up here. Okay, so that's an example of an L. Let's have a look at another example. This idea here, where you have basically a dark sort of horizon, whatever that is, it could be like a mass of some houses or trees or something like that. Let's say we've got a mass of trees there. Okay. And then let's say I do a couple of people walking. That also is a bit like an L, because you have a sort of axis here and an axis here. This would be dark, and then that would sort of show them up. So that's another example of an L. Another example, this is more how I normally think of it, which is trees. Big tree in the foreground. Again, this is like our scale principle, good outline. So that becomes a dark mass of a tree, and then that casts a shadow. So that's created an L. And what you'll see here is this is also perhaps using the framing idea. So we're framing up this area as somewhere to put something interesting. So again, what should we have this time? We're going to have another church. Okay, there we go. And that might have so that's still an L shape because we're using that as our main composition or device. Okay. Others could be, how about this one? Tree line. Okay, again, look, variety. Tree line, break the top of the picture plane maybe. Okay, that's the side of the water. Okay, and then here we've got a boat. So that might be another L shape. Like so. Okay, so that's our L shapes. Now, so that's given you 3 to work with this week. The L shape, the circle, and the rule of thirds. Now, what I want to do is, as we've got a bit of time left, is just say a little bit more about these thumbnail sketches for you. So, as I was skimming through this book this morning, I quite like this. So, in it, he talks about trying to do a composition a day. And he says, no exercise will give you that breakthrough more surely than the composition a day exercise. So this is, he says, it's a bit like practicing scales on a piano. Okay, and what you're trying to do is each day you're going to do, obviously if you've got the time and you feel inclined, but even one a week would be a good place to start. You're saying you'd learn more through this exercise than you might do through doing loads of finished paintings. Okay, so I've got a small sketchbook here. Okay, and I'm going to try and put that up there. So hopefully you can see that, and the autofocus is going to correct itself. So that's a small little sketchbook. And then what I'm going to do is use a pencil. Okay, so and this is what he's suggesting is you've got your page and then you draw within it your border. Now remember, for some people that might be this, you might want to work with square compositions. But the idea here is that we can always extend if we need to, okay? So you're trying to strike a balance here between doing it accurately, but also doing it in a sort of offhand practice way. But you're still striving for it to be relatively like something you could work from if you're doing a painting, okay? Now I'm going to do a quick thumbnail sketch here of a painting I did of Blickling Hall. Is it? No, it's Ickworth. Ickworth, okay. So I'm not going to do too much detail, but I'm just going to show you how sort of the level of finish that I would be sort of suggest you aim for. So first of all, I'm just going to use a more of a gestural line to get my composition in. In that Ian Roberts book, he's got very nice thumbnail studies, and they're quite finished. So then we've got a tree here, okay, and another tree here. So that's, and then the composition is somewhat balanced by another tree over here. Okay. And then in this foreground there were lots of sort of planted little shrubs and plants and that sort of thing. Okay, so that, I know that's probably a little bit faint for you, but hopefully you can still just about make it out. So first of all, you're trying to sketch in your objects, and that's again something where you could play around with your arrangement. I could redraw this. This is sort of somewhat using this wedge idea. This is what I talked about last time. So we're using this sort of design to hold the composition together. So now for the shading, and this is the point, is that I saw some people's thumbnail sketches and the shading was a bit like this. Okay, and the trouble with this is it becomes neither one thing or another. So you want to, when you're doing your thumbnails, you need to be making sure that your tonal values are basically what you want them to be. That's why you work small, because if you're doing an A4 drawing of pencil, establishing a large dark mass, you will end up scribbling because you'll get bored. Okay. So with this one, if I squint my eyes, the tonal composition was somewhat like this. Okay, so this was basically like a darkish mid value. And I am ignoring all the detail of the building because, say, this stage I'm just looking for a sort of tonal representation of the big shapes, which again feeds somewhat through to how we're looking to paint anyway. So that's like that. Like that. So hopefully you can see that that is definitely a dark shape. Okay, so there's not much, although there's the grain of the paper, it's still fairly dark. Now, this tree here was definitely a dark mass. With a little bit of a cast shadow. And this tree here came down and also had a bit of a cast shadow. Now in this composition, these little shapes here, they were just little like dark spots really, but the top of them caught the light, so they did remain, that remained a little bit of an area of interest, something like that. But they probably weren't as light as the sky, so they would almost be knocked back a bit as well. Okay, some darks there. And in this case, these trees here were dark. And there was another one there just sticking out. Okay, so the sky was the lightest mass, and the grass was like a mid value. Okay, and if anything, it was darker at the bottom of the composition and then got a bit lighter as it went up. Okay, so, and then looking at it, I can say, well, this probably still needs to be a bit darker up here. So I can tweak my values by just putting a bit more pressure on the pencil, but I'm still working now with these large sort of simple masses. So no windows or detail or anything like that at this stage. Okay, so now that works better. And then there was some clouds in the sky, but bearing in mind I wanted to keep the sky light, this is very subtle sort of shading here. Something like that. Now if I bring that a bit closer for you. Okay, so that is a thumbnail sketch. Okay, that's the sort of level. So would you change what you see? Yes, definitely. Yeah. So Teresa's just asking me there whether you would change what you see tonally. And a good example of that is like Sego's stuff, because again, when you go out, there are some effects which you'll only see, like for example, having a dark, stormy sky with a brightly lit object. But another one is something like this, say. So, so one of the principles is in design is you can think like a yin-yang. Okay, so you've got dark against light and then light against dark. So that gives you a good principle, as you're always trying to play lights against darks and darks against light. But it feeds into the idea of things like, I think it's counter change or interchange. So for example, you've got a tree. Okay, tree comes in like that. So the tree against the sky is a dark mass. And then what you do is you leave the trunk light and then play the trunk against a dark mass. So do you see something like that? So that's like dark against light, light against dark. And those are the sorts of things that work really well in a painting that you might not see, but they can, if we just, you see, if we just make that dark, okay, we've lost it. So sometimes you deliberately adjust the tonal values to make better compositional choices, okay? So, yeah, so there's my thumbnail sketch. And his recommendation is to do one of these a day. So you could either do them, and this is the sort of scale. So this is a, what's this little book here? That's A5, okay? You could go even smaller. But in it, he makes a nice distinction, which is that you're trying to move away from this. If I go out with my sketchbook and I spend ages, say, drawing a little shed in the allotment, okay, and I look at all the textures and the wood and all that sort of stuff, then that really is a study, okay? That's a study of an object. And that's usually done on the page like that, okay? However, a compositional design is always done within a border, okay, because you're interested in how the object relates to the whole. And you don't just do the object, but you're interested in how you play that object against the background. Okay, so in this case, I might do, so again with Teresa's thing, so that's light. So if I make that dark, okay, so you've got light against dark, then that makes this side mid value. Okay, so the mid value will still read against dark. Maybe make the roof light. Okay, cast shadow there, so that gives our sense of scale. And then maybe if the light's coming from the side, it might even be that the ground itself is a bit dark, okay? So that's a composition versus a study of a thing. So that's again what we're after this week, is to, he's saying do one a day. So that would be my challenge for those of you that are particularly keen, is to do a thumbnail study like that and bring your tonal values to more of a finish where you've identified dark and light. Yeah, you can always see a transition, light, dark, light. Yeah, that's right, yeah. And again, particularly when you get into things like printmaking, if you're only using tone, then that's all you can get really. And if you look at landscape, you'll see this sort of thing. So say we've got, let's imagine this is a dark silhouette, okay? Then you create some rocks, okay? And that creates another dark shape. Okay, and then you get another shadow across the land like that. And maybe another shadow like that. Okay, and then dark. So this is why doing black and white compositions are so useful. So you get this continual band of dark light, dark light, dark light. And again, it keeps the eye moving and gives it interest, okay? Good. Light beak on dark. Yeah, that's good. I say the other example is portraits. Portraits are good. So there's our face. Okay. So a portrait artist will often do this thing, is that this side of the face becomes dark. So you play the light side against dark, and then the dark side, you allow that to be mid-value, and then maybe dark around there, okay? And that way you can create a the same thing. So you always, again, if you play dark against dark, you lose the silhouette, you see. So you want to try and avoid that. So yeah, work through those. So try and do one a day. That would be really good. Rule of thirds, the circle, and what was the other one? The L shape. Okay, so 3 compositional devices to play around with, and you can get those to me by Thursday and we'll see what you've done. I think on Wednesday I'm going to do another master study, and I say I might have a look at this Peter Warman again because I really enjoyed his DVD, so I thought perhaps I would re-watch it and try and have a go at one of his. So okay, so I hope you found that useful. Again, you can always email me if you've got any more questions. And but yeah, look forward to seeing what you produce. And for those of you that are Zooming, yeah, let's say 11:05. Okay. Anyway, thanks a lot for that, and I'll see you soon. Cheers. You can always email me if you've got any more questions. And but yeah, look forward to seeing what you produce. And for those of you that are Zooming, yeah, let's say 11:05. Okay. Anyway, thanks a lot for that, and I'll see you soon. Cheers.